Hi, everyone. So hope everybody's okay. I'm the last speech, I believe, before lunch, so you have to bear with me. And I'm going to talk about a topic which has been actually in the agenda for in the coming 2 days, total cost of ownership. It's more of a business topic. I'm not going to talk so much about new technologies which will reinvent the wheel, but more on how do we make whatever is our business successful. And I want to start with this statement to try to make a little bit everybody relaxed. If your IoT project failed, you should not worry because you are not alone. There is still this statistics, which is, it is what it is, but I believe it's still the reality. When I go into this kind of conferences, that's what I speak, and that's what I exchange with people which has been in the space for a long time, is that there is around still 1 out of 6 IoT projects which shows significant payoff, and which means there is around 20 to 30% of IoT project which fails, which is around, in generally, the proof of concept time. So it's still a challenge because we have to spend a lot of time as companies, as ecosystem partners to support projects which won't fly. And still, let's look at what remains difficult. What remains difficult in IoT, and it's not me who says this, it's a source from Microsoft, the complexity. So, and that's where there was few pitch before me about zero-touch provisioning and some of these concepts to make it simpler, because ultimately IoT is a concept. IoT is about collecting data. We are addressing so many different verticals, like we saw in the previous keynotes, and we need to apply it to a specific environment, where there won't be necessarily the IoT knowledge. So the complexity is still seen as number one. Number two is the lack of budget. To me, this one, I would rephrase it into a misunderstanding or misconception on return on investments. If you don't have the budget and resources, it maybe means that you don't necessarily know how to apply IoT to your application. So we get back into the use cases, and we get back into how IoT in a company will be helping to do things better and cheaper. That's number one. Then you have the lack of knowledge, not yet found the right solution, and security. Ultimately, what happened is that your project fails. So there is a lot of reason for that, which is shown into this graph, which comes from Beachman Research. And the number one is still seen as cost. So last year, I spoke a little bit about these failure rates, about the reason, and this year I wanted to highlight a little bit more on the costs, because I've been spending more time in the last few years to talk with customers, and I still see a lot of the misconception in terms of how do we address cost in IoT. Very often, you get into the how much costs your module, how much costs your sensors, how much is a subscription, etc., which, in my view, is a little bit wrong. So that's the question, is how do we approach cost in an IoT project? It's still, I think, something which needs to be worked out with the users, which are generally new, and there is a need of a mindset shift, which is to frame yourself to success, avoiding the pitfall of the 80% of the project which fails. The mindset, so whenever I meet somebody which is new into this field, the discussion is a lot about first, no, don't look at the face value. If you ask me how much my chip, my module is costing, or my PCB is costing, please, let's try to take a little bit of height. And let's remember that 70% of the IoT project, they fail very often because the knowledge of all this new technology, not so new actually, because I've been doing this for 20 years, but still there is always new flavors coming, and there is lots of learning from young engineers, which looks less and less on how things work deeply. They are not necessarily all interested to get back into the deep roots of how it works. They want some things which is easy to use. That's the mindset of lots of young developers. And if we provide is not if what we provide is not well packaged, generally you start to have hurdles. There is 15 technology providers in a complete end-to-end solution. And that's where, if you don't go with the right technology partners, which has a sense of ecosystem, and I think that's what we are doing in this conference, having the whole ecosystem to meet together and to discuss about the best practice, maybe building new alliance. Generally, you are setting you're set for failures. And one of the key success factors, of course, will be to have partners which will look at what we call the total cost of ownership, which has been presented in so many different ways. So I will bring my own 10 cents, and I will try to speak very practically on what I've seen, which is very often neglected when we talk about TCO. So I have this slide. It's a little bit busy, but I like the iceberg. The product cost is generally always the tip of the iceberg, and there is all this different stuff. So I have summarized the 5 which, for me, are the most costly for a project, which leads to failure. The first one is the lack of training, lack of education. We come to a meter manufacturer, we come to a building management company, we explain that putting all these technologies will make things cheaper, better, faster, and you should use LoRaWAN, by the way. In my view, that's where you need to spend a bit of time to look at the use case and to really have a system approach. And unfortunately or fortunately, there is no standard in IoT, and there is still lots of customization which is needed to what the KPI and the target of the customer will be. So training and education, I believe it's the first step. I'm going to talk a bit about it later, and it's very critical. Installation. Nothing new, but unfortunately, I still see lots of misconception where customers are looking for the cost of the PCB and removing this or this component at 30 cents, and which can lead to a complete disaster later on when you deploy if you have failure. Having zero-touch provisioning in the way it was presented in some other keynotes, I believe it's helping a lot. If generally, what happened on the field, I had it again recently, you give this piece of technology to an installer which don't have any background, he knows how to use a screw, drivers, and that's it. And if you ask him to do some provisioning, generally, you end up to have problems. In the field of solar, photovoltaic, there is very interesting practice, actually, which are happening to program a solar system. Energy and data consumption is another one. Of course, so we are in LoRaWAN conferences, so we believe that every IoT application should be low power. It's not necessarily the case. We see that there is a lot of Wi-Fi 6, 5G, LTE, even though 5G, we still try to look at the use cases, and they are not all proven. We are still at this stage, but the big question is always to ask the why. There is still this conception that low power means low data rate, means low costs. And I think that's where there is a mindset. When I was at Embedded World last May, it was very interesting to see all the edge AI processing with very expensive industrial PC with NVIDIA on it. And we had the IoT corner, and we had a booth over there, and it was still a lot about cost perception. And the high speed, of course, means high data rate and a high price. Is this really applicable? And that's the right approach for me, is to avoid this kind of oversimplification and to really look at understanding the data flow and how the data you are collecting. IoT is about collecting data, how this data will enrich your business, will either make you save money because you have an insight on what's going on real time, and then you can take a quick action and reduce your operational costs, or you can improve your customer satisfaction because you know what's going on and you can make your customer happy. Or you can move into services and get out of the pure hardware battle, which has been also there for a pretty long time. Maintenance, we are talking about OpEx of maintaining an IoT system. This can be a killer, and you really need to ask yourself how much it costs to send somebody, or even ask yourself
how do you avoid to have to send anybody to maintain the system? We, as vendors, don't necessarily have to think about it. It's the users, the one which will welcome all these new technologies, which will have to manage it, and he will have the pain to deal with it. If he doesn't have the right support structure in his company, it can be a disaster. I just tell you this example that I had with the Department of Transport in New York. They implemented a smart traffic system with a very expensive box, lots of equipment inside. I think the box was between $5,000 to $6,000. Great, and then you could monitor what was going on live. The power supply during summertime wouldn't sustain the high temperature. They had 10% failure rate. 10% failure rate on the power supply, which was, I think, in the BOEM around $10. So they had to run a truck. Each time there was a breakdown during summertime, it was costing them €1,000 each time they had to run a truck. And they had 10% failures every week for 2-3 months. So it costed them millions to manage and maintain their system, just because of a power supply which was under spec. Looks silly, but it's still happening a lot. The last one, which I think is very important, is the impact on the team morals. When you start to receive a lot of customer complaints, your support team is getting tense, and there is some whispering in the companies, frustration, which is like, okay, our stuff doesn't work. We receive all these complaints, the customer says it doesn't work, it deploys. Then it goes to operation, it goes to sales guys, which will freak out because they are afraid to be shot by a customer, and ultimately, it can kill our business. I've seen also projects which completely stopped because at some point there was so much failures and so much frustration, and the company went bankrupt. So the one right approach in here, and I think we provide technology, great. How does it apply to the world where we deploy? We are deploying in the metering space. Somebody needs to commit 15 years warranty. The hardware needs to have 15 years warranty. How many years we commit? Few years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can we commit 10 years? Do we understand how the users will be billed for penalties in case he has too much failures? And how do we get the technology in the end to serve the domain, the application, where it will help to demonstrate that we can operate equipment for cheaper and it will work better and cheaper. So in short, on the total cost of ownership, it's of course you have the direct costs, indirect costs of building and maintaining an IoT solution, deploying along all its life cycle. I think we are not completely there. Lots of users, because it's new, because it has not been deployed, struggle to understand what is the life cycle of an IoT solution and how do we support it, how do we reflect on these costs, and how we should go about it. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit of the frameworks that we developed in SG. So Seasons Group, we are having 4 factories in the world. We manufacture in Mexico, UK, Malaysia, and China. We have design team. And I like these frameworks on the 4-step, where we try to break down a project, an IoT project, from beginning to the end, where the first phase, which is almost like a consultative approach, is to explore and being able to tell to anybody who wants to get into IoT, it can be you, it can be a customer, okay, why do we need to connect? How do we do it today? Is it critical? Is there money? These kind of things. Before we put together a scope of work where we define it needs to use LoRaWAN, it needs to send this amount of data, and we need this certification. So this phase is the one which I generally see the failing the most, is exploring wrong specification, wrong understanding from the one who is requesting some help in the IoT solution with nobody to fund and no return on investment defined. Create. So what we try to do is to come with a 90 days proof of concept, having an MVP. I strongly believe that the sooner you put the units on the field and you get it to report data, then the sooner we start to really talk. Okay, now I get my critical IoT data. What do I do with it? How does it flow in my process, in my company process? Is my IT system adjusted, adapted to whatever IoT data I bring or not? deploying. I was in another panel earlier. You generally have it to work in a lab on your first 5-10 units. Then you start to put 50, 100 units on your pilots, it's still okay, and then you put 1,000 and it's a disaster. So being able to deploy quickly and being able to scale your project is critical. I see generally project fails into the explore phase and into the scaling phase. Scaling phase, which is where engineering needs to pass everything to operation, and then you have this battle which you see in every company, which is like production engineering, do the testing, doesn't work, needs to go back in R&D. They do design verification 1 or 2, goes back 1, 2, 3 times, 9 months is gone, your project is dead, more or less. When we talk, so the scaling is where we developed also lots of expertise because we've been doing manufacturing for the last 50 years. And that's what we try to bring on the table to our customer by having facilities close to the area somewhere in the world. So that's it for my presentation. So we have a booth over there. So if you guys want to talk about your pain, your challenge, the IoT project which failed, and having a coffee around what we could have done better, please feel free to talk about it. I have plenty of sad stories to share. And otherwise, of course, there is lunch. And yes, if there is any project that you want to discuss, please come to see me. Thank you.